Okay, to start this video, I want you to imagine the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. An absolute masterpiece that's almost flawless in your eyes. Good. Now, does that thing you're imagining look something like this? No? Well, that's what I imagine. This is a panel from the Mob Psycho 100 manga, and being written by author 1 in 2012, then receiving an anime adaptation by Studio Bones in 2017, it is my favorite story. Now, usually when I make a video on a show or manga that I like, I pretty much just do the My Anime List breakdown. You know, plot, characters, art, music, enjoyment, whatever that means, slap a 10 on the end and call it good. But that just doesn't feel right for this story, because to me, Mob Psycho 100 is much more than the sum of its parts. I think it's almost cliche at this point for video essays to say that a piece of media in some way changed their life. But you know what? That's what I'm saying. Because Mob Psycho's main idea is changing your life. This show has affected real decisions I've made, and that is something a numeric score could never express. And so my goal today isn't to try and convince you to watch Mob Psycho. Let's be honest, you probably already have. Instead, it's to get you, the viewer, to understand why I love it. And yes, there is a difference between those two things. A difference that you'll hopefully recognize if you, for some reason, decide to listen to me ramble about an anime for far too long. So to start, let's talk about One Punch Man. As One's other work and the older brother to Mob Psycho, people often like to draw comparisons between the two. Both are superpowered stories set in a bland cityscape that's complemented by a bizarre comedic tone. The protagonists, Saitama and Shigeo, are also similar in that they're both ridiculously overpowered, almost to the point that there's nothing that could pose a threat to them. So what separates these two stories? What makes these two protagonists compelling and unique? Why do I cry so much when I hear this song? Well, all that can be answered with one word: emotions. If I had to pick one emotion that Saitama most often displays, it would be confidence. There's hardly one moment in the entire show where Saitama isn't completely confident in himself. And I'm not just talking about confidence in his powers. A major part of Saitama's character is just not giving a crap about what others think. Even when being condemned by crowds of people, his resolve is unflinching. Saitama isn't meant to change. He's a beacon of unwavering strength, there to swoop in and save the day when all hope is lost. Shigeo Kageyama, or Mob on the other hand, is none of that. He holds unimaginable power, and yet he completely lacks self-confidence. You see, Mob has psychic abilities, which are controlled by his emotions, meaning that if he lets his emotions get out of control, his powers will follow suit. Mob learned this the hard way at a young age, and ended up hurting someone close to him in the process. And so, determined not to cause any more accidents with his powers, Mob began to repress his emotions. Because of this, Mob doesn't really fit in with the other kids at Salt Middle School. He's quiet, insecure, and doesn't know how to properly express himself. Growing up, Mob was often looked down upon for these things. When the other kids would laugh, he wouldn't understand why, leaving him feeling ostracized whilst being told to get a clue. Outside of his powers, Mob doesn't really have any special talents. Actually, he kinda sucks at most of the things he tries. He's not good at school, he's physically weak, and he tries to make friends, but that's a hard thing to do when you don't have any interest to share in the first place. This is why when Mob stumbles across the Spirits and Such consultation office, he's filled with excitement. Excitement at the thought that there might be someone he can talk to about his powers, someone like him. But instead, who he's met with is Reigen. Reigen is a psychic, or at least that's what he wants people to believe. Really, he's a struggling businessman who uses his absurdly high charisma stat to convince people that he's the real deal. But of course, Mob doesn't see this. As Reigen reluctantly sits down and offers him some advice, Mob latches on to every word, and in this, Reigen sees opportunity. He asks Mob to join him as an employee, and Mob happily accepts. So from this point on, most of the show follows these two, as they take on odd jobs ranging from exorcising ancient spirits to giving back massages. And can I just say, it is so fun watching these two interact in bizarre situations. Reigen is like the perfect opposite to Mob. While Mob is a timid boy with incredible power, Reigen is an almost overconfident man with absolutely no powers. And at first, it kinda seems like Reigen is taking advantage of Mob, but that's not exactly true. While he does pay Mob an extortionately low 300 yen per hour, over time we come to see that Reigen genuinely cares for him. He acts as a mentor to Mob, and it's Reigen's teachings that come to guide Mob's decisions throughout the story, the main teaching being that Mob's powers do not make him special. This is a principle that Reigen himself lives by. He's the one that would benefit the most from having powers, and yet he never once wishes for them. Instead, he works hard as a businessman and solves people's problems in a way that only he could. I think the point where the story really kicks off is episode 2. The episode emphasizes the fact that Mob's life has always been controlled by others. He's begged by his classmates to join their collapsing telepathy club, whilst also being pulled in the other direction by Reigen and his job as a psychic. Of course, he listens to Reigen, and while on the job, he meets a spirit that apparently lived a similar life to himself, a loser who let his decisions be dictated by those around him. The spirit asks Mob, "Hey, are you living every day to the fullest?" This question really cuts deep into Mob's mind, and after pondering it, he realizes that he's not. Mob has no ambitions, and so he relies on others to dictate his purpose. Because of this, Mob feels like he's wasting his life, like there's experiences that he's missing out on. Mob wants friends, he wants respect, he wants hobbies, he wants love, but he knows powers can't get him these things. Instead, he must change from within. And so, in his first act of self-determination, Mob decides to join the Body Improvement Club at his middle school. I freaking love the Body Improvement Club. Usually when muscleheads get portrayed in media, it's as these punks who bully others and think that they're better than everyone. But instead, when Mob asks to join the Body Improvement Club, they're absolutely psyched. It's stuff like this that makes me love one as a writer. The Body Improvement Club serves as a wholesome and also realistic subversion to our expectations. Of course these dudes would be hyped to see someone like Mob decide to improve himself. Because Mob had always relied on his powers for everything, he's not physically fit, and now he seeks to change that. He pushes himself to the limit in his training and fails constantly, but with the encouragement of the club, he picks himself back up and keeps fighting on. Through joining the Body Improvement Club, Mob shows that he's done taking the easy way out. There's no reason for a person with powers to gain muscle, but Mob knows that taking the harder road will push growth out of himself, making him stronger than ever before. Of course, not everyone in Mob's situation would think the same way he does, like Teru, who we meet in episode 4. Teru, like Mob, was born with psychic powers. However, unlike Mob, he chooses to use them at almost every opportunity available. Teru has used his powers to gain popularity among his classmates, and now rules his school with an iron fist. He believes that his powers are a gift, and that they make him better than other people. I mean, bro literally says that he's the main character of the world. Which is why when Teru meets Mob, the actual main character of this story, he's shocked. Up until this point, Teru had existed as a big fish in a very small pond, and now Mob threatens that existence. Teru immediately tries to fight Mob and assert his dominance, but Mob won't fight back. He tells Teru that he doesn't want to live a life having to rely on psychic powers to solve his problems. But this only makes Teru more angry. He can't believe that someone gifted with his powers would stoop to the level of an average human. Teru continues his assault and tries everything he can to break Mob's persona, but Mob refuses to fight back. And eventually, Mob realizes why Teru hates him so much. It's because they're the same. Both Mob and Teru are scared that without their powers, they're nothing. No friends, no standing out, just another average loser who won't leave a mark. But the two handle this in very different ways. Mob has made the decision that he will change himself, that he will choose the harder path in order to become a better person. On the other hand, Teru has always taken the easy way out. He's scared of change, meaning that he's scared of Mob and all he represents. Upon this realization, Teru becomes completely enraged and screams for Mob to use his powers. But Mob won't give in. He can't give in. He needs to prove to himself that he can change. Mob fights as hard as he can until the very end not to use his powers, but after being choked out by Teru, he breaks. Mob loses control, his emotions painted across the screen as he obliterates Teru and the school surrounding them. This moment isn't satisfying like most power-ups are. Instead, it's deeply saddening. Tears roll down Mob's face as he realizes that he failed to change. He caused another accident because of his psychic powers and doesn't know where to direct his emotions. He's overwhelmed by a feeling of powerlessness, the feeling that he would never be able to conquer himself. I tear up a bit whenever I see this scene. Up until this point in the show, we've seen how earnest Mob has been in turning his life around, how hard he's worked to improve himself. All that making this scene hit like a sucker punch to the face. A reminder that change takes time, and while Mob was taking steps in the right direction, he hadn't yet acquired the strength to change. But things aren't all bad. Because of Mob, Teru realizes that it was he who was average for relying on his powers. He accepts that he needs to change, and in the process becomes one of the best characters in the entire show. When you boil it down, most hero-type stories revolve around acquiring power. A character's development will often be reflected by their skill, with transformations marking significant moments in their story arc. And I'm not trying to take a jab at this kind of storytelling, because when it works well. Think something like Miles' leap of faith scene from Into the Spider-Verse. I've probably watched it like a cool 10,000 times, but I also love when a story like Mob Psycho decides to take a different approach to this idea. The show actively discourages acquiring power in favor of acquiring strength, and we can most clearly see this at play with the story of Ritsu. Ritsu is Mob's younger brother, and from an outside view, it seems like he has everything Mob doesn't. Charisma, intelligence, athleticism, good looks. Ritsu is the golden child of the Kageyama household, and yet he still can't look past what he doesn't have. Deep down, Ritsu envies Mob's powers and resents him for not putting them to good use. For years, he wished for powers of his own, but when Ritsu's wishes finally come true, he's not even happy. Instead, he's angry that he doesn't have enough power and takes that anger out on others. Fueled by corruption and guilt, Ritsu takes part in a scandal to expel the delinquents from his school. Word of his power travels quickly, and he even ends up hurting a bunch of people. While before, Ritsu could never upset Mob for fear of his powers, he now confronts him directly, attempting to prove his strength. Ritsu says that he's done being buddies, but Mob knows that isn't true. He refuses to fight and apologizes to the people that Ritsu hurt, leaving Ritsu baffled at how Mob could put himself below such pathetic people. It's only after getting captured by the villain group Claw and being forced to rely on low-level psychics that Ritsu begins to realize he was wrong. Him getting powers didn't make him better than anyone else. Instead, they only brought out the worst parts of himself. Ritsu is ashamed of his actions and scared that Mob won't forgive him. But when the two finally meet again, Mob embraces him. He expresses how much he admires Ritsu for the attributes he's worked for, and how strong he was for never needing powers to get by. Mob didn't even give Ritsu the chance to apologize. While Ritsu initially thought that strength came from power, Mob makes him realize that true strength comes in the form of kindness, and the will to change. This will is put on display as Mob chooses to challenge himself with each new episode. From running for student council, to helping a girl stand up to her friends, to even standing up to clients himself, Mob grows with each new experience and begins to more fully understand his emotions. His biggest test, however, comes in episode 5 of season 2, which also happens to be my favorite anime episode of all time. Immediately, the tone is completely different from the rest of the show. The episode is grungy and devoid of color. There's almost no music used, and the screen is letterboxed for a cinematic effect. In the previous episode, Mob was trapped in a young girl's mind by Mogami, a powerful psychic who upon death became a vengeful spirit. Mogami believes that negative emotions are more powerful than positive, and tries to foster them in Mob by forcing him into a grim alternate reality that mirrors his own. In this world, Mob is relentlessly tormented by everyone around him, including the very girl he was trying to save. He's without the use of his powers, and so he's forced to take this anguish head on, day after day. Even his own brother Ritsu is no more than a stranger who doesn't bat an eye at Mob being physically assaulted. Mogami tells Mob that only the fortunate would refuse to use their powers, and that he's weak because of it. He says to him, if you don't become stronger, you'll be used, exploited, and forever a stepping stone for others. In his own life, Mogami wasn't as fortunate as Mob had been. At first, Mogami had used his powers for good. However, after his mother developed a mysterious illness, he was forced to take assassination jobs in order to cover the expensive cost of her treatment. Still, his mother died and blamed him for her misfortune. Afterwards, Mogami realized that the whole time he was being used, and upon becoming a spirit, vowed to punish those that brought misfortune to others. And it's through this simulation that Mogami wants Mob to be reborn as a sympathizer, to let his negative emotions explode and use them on the world. And after 6 months of torture, it really does seem like his plan might work. Anxiety, fear, rage, all these emotions build up in Mob until he can't control them anymore. He lashes out, almost like he's trying to kill the people assaulting him. Up until this point, Mob had always stuck by his principles. He would never hurt a normal person. But after spending so long bottling up his negative emotions, finally, he snaps. Until he remembers.
Oi.
Him and Mogami are not the same. Mob has Reigen and Dimple waiting for him on the outside. He has a brother who looks up to him. He's made friends who care for him. He has the Body Improvement Club who want to see him succeed. And he has a girl who he worked so hard to impress. All that training he did wasn't in vain, and all the connections Mob made weren't for nothing. The Mob that Mogami fabricated may have succumbed to him, but Shigeo Kageyama will not. In return, Mogami tries to tell Mob that the 6 months spent in this dream can't be erased that easily. But Mob replies to him, yes, while that may be true, seeing such a cruel and messed up alternate reality has only made me more thankful for the reality I do have. People can change through their interactions with others. The people around Mob have changed him for the better, and because of that, he is strong enough to face Mogami. And in Mob's own words, if I'm able to change, then everyone else should be able to as well. That means no one is worthless. Mogami's negative emotions explode as he attacks Mob, saying that life is painful and devoid of meaning. In response, Mob explodes too, not with negative emotions, but instead positive. This was the moment that the whole show was building up to, when Mob finally realizes that his powers were not a curse, but instead a gift that he can use to save people. As the two fight, the show asserts, Mogami had overlooked something that lay dormant within Mob. A person's heart is made up of two sides of the same coin. Just as happiness shines in the shadows of sorrow, only in the darkest depths of fear does courage truly shine. Mob chooses to believe in the good in the world, and in the end, his positive emotions overpower Mogami's negative ones, just as they always will in real life. I freaking love this episode. Everything about it is amazing. The music, the animation, the voice acting, the dialogue, the character moments, the theming, they all come together to create something that's so much bigger than the sum of its parts. It's like this episode is a checkpoint halfway through the show where we can see how far Mob has come. We've watched him work so hard and continuously fail for so long, but in this episode, he finally does it. He's finally able to conquer his powers. And watching this happen, I changed. Because when you watch an episode as good as this one, you can't help but reflect on your own life, on all the decisions and mistakes you've made that have led you to the point that you're at. But watching Mob change made me realize that my life doesn't have to be the same as it was yesterday. I'm the protagonist of my own life, and that's what makes it so beautiful. And if I start changing today, then hopefully, looking back in a couple of years, I'll be a better, stronger person than I am right now. But I also love how this isn't the end of the show. When Minori, the girl whose mind Mob was trapped in, finally awakes, he asks her if she's always that cruel. She admits that she is, and even after all the abuse she put him through, Mob forgives her. This act of kindness gives Minori the resolve to become better. And just as others have changed him, in this moment, Mob realizes that he can change others too. Everyone in Mob Psycho changes. Teru, Ritsu, Emi, Minori, and even this Josuke looking dude change because of Mob's actions. When Ritsu and the class president apologize for framing him, he tells them it doesn't matter. People didn't actually care if he was the culprit or not, they just wanted a reason to get him expelled. That was the real problem. He realized that he was hated by everyone around him and decided to change that. It's such a small background character arc, but he joins the Body Improvement Club and becomes like the best character in the whole show. He's pretty much Mob's biggest hype man throughout it all. At the end of season 2, when we first meet Toichiro Suzuki, it's immediately established that he's a man who believes only in himself. As the president of Claw and the most powerful man in the world, he had always lived his life exactly as he wanted, unconcerned with how others felt. Toichiro believes that he is strong enough on his own, causing him to push away everyone around him and think of them only as tools to be taken advantage of. But as we've seen, this is the exact opposite of Mob's experience. When the two meet, Mob tells him that someday he'll come to regret this way of thinking, and that people making up for others' deficiencies is what makes the world go round. He offers to be Toichiro's friend, but of course, Toichiro retaliates in disgust, the only way he ever knew to solve his problems. The two face off, and Toichiro ends up releasing too much power, turning himself into an unstable ball of explosive energy. He knows it's over, and kneeling in the midst of their wreckage, Toichiro tells Mob that the only way to save his friends is to sever his life before an explosion. But Mob won't do it. He creates a barrier around the two, attempting to contain the explosion and save Toichiro's life. Toichiro is stunned as Mob explains to him how he's learned to make choices for himself, and how right now, no matter how much he dislikes Toichiro, to leave him here to suffer on his own would just be too sad. This causes Toichiro to reflect on his own life and realize that he was wrong. People need other people. This power was not worth the cost of his wife and child, the only people he had ever cared about. Toichiro wishes for a second chance to apologize, a chance that Mob gives him when he absorbs Toichiro's power, almost losing his life in the process. In the end, Toichiro finally apologizes to his family, and learns that no matter how far away he pushed them, the people around him still cared. Serizawa had long lived his life in solitude, scared of what might happen if his powers were unleashed on humanity. This is why, upon meeting Toichiro and seeing his powers, for the first time in his life he felt understood. Toichiro gave him an escape from his anxieties, and because of this, Serizawa latched onto him, blindly following his every command. Serizawa believes that through the Claw organization he has found his place in society, which is why when Mob shows up and tells him that what he's doing is wrong, it comes as such a shock. Serizawa won't accept it. All he had ever wanted was friends. He knows that what he's doing is wrong, but after wasting so much of his life as a shut-in, Toichiro was the only person that had ever made him feel wanted. He thinks that it's too late to change, that there's nothing else out there for him. But after absorbing Mob's power and feeling the struggles contained within, Serizawa realizes that none of that is true. And while he's grateful for Toichiro for believing in him, if his happiness came as a result of others' tears, he never wanted it in the first place. Serizawa helps protect Mob from the president, and what I love about his character is that even after the dust is settled, he continues to change. Serizawa joins Mob and Reigen at the Spirits and Such consultation office and tries to make the world a better place through his work. He struggles with things like finding purpose and being independent, but over time, with the help of his new friends, his confidence blossoms. Dimple is a character that had always seemed to be in the background of the show. He plays a key role in pretty much every arc, but for a lot of the show, he still kind of feels like the token companion character to Mob. Dimple was the leader of this great big laughing cult, but after Mob destroys it by being physically unable to laugh, you can tell Dimple feels lost. He had people worshipping him, but now he's forced to trail behind an awkward middle school boy in the hopes that he can one day use him to regain power. Dimple even tells Mob that his ultimate goal is to one day become a god. This goal soon fades, however, as Dimple continues to get mixed up in the business of Mob and friends, And while he would never admit it, over time, we see Dimple come to genuinely care about Shige and the people around him. When Mob is trapped in Minori's mind by Mogami, it's Dimple that volunteers to go in and snap him out of it. But eventually, Dimple begins to feel like he's lost sight of his ultimate goal, and this scares him. Without his goal, what is he? Dimple tries to fight these feelings by proving to himself that he has ambition. When a cult rises up to worship the Divine Tree, Dimple tries to convince Mob to step up as its founder, but obviously, he says no. Upon hearing this, Dimple decides to take matters into his own hands, using Mob's image along with power from the Divine Tree to brainwash the people of Seasoning City. Soon enough, Mob finds out what's going on and confronts Dimple. He tells him that what he's doing is pointless and wrong, but Dimple doesn't see the problem. He enjoys this way of life, and everyone he controls lives in a constant state of bliss. Dimple tries again to get Mob to join him, but Mob tells him he won't. This time, Dimple is angered. He can't believe that Mob could just casually deny the thing that he's been wanting the whole show. So in a fit of rage, Dimple attacks. Mob defends himself and tells Dimple that he doesn't want to hurt him, that he knows this isn't his true self. But as Dimple continues to press the attack, Mob's emotions begin to rise. He's about to erupt, to force Dimple to see the error of his ways. But then, he stops. He realizes that Dimple would never actually hurt him, that his powers were only getting in the way of them talking. Dimple doesn't understand. He's a dangerous evil spirit. Mob would never just let him do all of this, but Mob knows it's all just a facade. He's not a dangerous spirit, he just got carried away, like everybody does at times. Mob tells Dimple that he's sorry for not giving him the time or attention he deserved, for not realizing that this wasn't just some scheme. When Dimple was finally given the chance to achieve his dream, he wanted Mob there with him. But now that they're together, they can talk about everything he wants. Dimple is taken aback by this and reflects on how in the end, his goal was meaningless. All he had ever wanted was to be acknowledged, and having the city worship him didn't satisfy him in the way he thought it would. Dimple realizes that really, all he wanted was a friend, and that he's finally found that in Mob. In the end, Dimple completely changes from a spirit who only knew how to take advantage of people to someone who would willingly sacrifice himself for others. And finally, we're at Reigen, whose character arc takes place mostly during Season 2. By this point in the show, we've seen how close him and Mob have become, and that, while he could be selfish at times, Reigen always tried to do what he thought was best for Mob. He got Mob out of some tight spots, and even stuck up for him at the cost of his business. But in episode 6 of Season 2, Reigen has a major lapse in judgment. Him and Mob get into an argument, and Reigen ends up saying some real hurtful stuff, causing Mob to stop showing up to work. At first, Reigen tries to rationalize things. Surely Mob will come back once he realizes how lost he is without his master. And besides, Reigen built his business from the ground up by himself. Why should he care what some middle school boy decides to do? But over time, Reigen begins to think that maybe he was wrong. He sees Mob hanging out with friends, looking happier than ever, and realizes that maybe he needed Mob more than Mob ever needed him. No, that can't be true. He won't admit it. Reigen tries not to think about it, continuing to do things the same way he always did. But slowly, his life begins to take a downward spiral. He comes home to the same empty apartment every day, the only messages in his inbox coming from his concerned parents. He regularly goes to a bar filled with outcasts and gives them advice just so that he can feel needed. And it's only when he's drunk and hurling in a back alley that he realizes that he doesn't actually have any friends. He's heading in a bad direction, far from the capable man he presents himself as, and he will not accept it. Reigen decides that he must change, by any means necessary. And so he gets back on that grind set, working tirelessly to turn his life around. Volunteering, streaming, life counseling, game exorcisms, Reigen takes every job he can and quickly builds up a reputation for himself. His online popularity skyrockets, getting him magazine interviews and even the opportunity to appear on TV, an offer that he excitedly accepts only to realize too late that it was a setup. It turns out the boy he was supposed to perform an exorcism on was an actor, and Reigen is exposed to the world as a fraud. He can't believe it. He was on top of the world just a couple of days ago, but now, because of a few jealous psychics, his career is ruined. Even the outcast at his dingy bar won't talk to him anymore. Reigen is forced to hold a press conference to defend himself, and as he does, he begins to reflect on how things got to this point. Why did he become a psychic in the first place? It's not like it's a necessarily lucrative job. Reigen recalls that he quit his job on a whim, and became a psychic because of an ad he saw in a magazine. It all didn't really matter to him. That is, until Mob came along. When he first met Mob and gave him advice, he really didn't know what he was doing. He just made it all up. But when he saw Mob's eyes brimming with hope, he couldn't help but empathize. Reigen feels like an imposter. He wanted to become someone special that Mob could look up to, but as he sits up on that stage, he feels weak. Weak because he couldn't accept that Mob didn't need him anymore. That maybe he was the one caging in Mob the most. And so when he finally opens his mouth, he's not addressing the journalists and reporters in front of him, but instead Mob. Reigen finally voices his true feelings to Mob, and as he does, a mysterious burst of psychic energy hits the room. Mob has accepted Reigen's feelings. After the conference, the two meet, and Reigen apprehensively asks if Mob knows what he really is. In response, Mob says that he's always known. He's always known that his master was a genuinely good guy. Reigen never needed to be someone special, he just needed to be there for Mob, and that was enough. And from this point on, Reigen makes an extra effort to do exactly that. When Mob decides that he wants to train for a school race, Reigen is right there, running alongside him. As the series progresses, the two continue to push growth out of each other, until we begin to see them do things they never would have in the beginning. When Mob finds out that his longtime crush Tsubome is moving away, he actually decides that he's gonna take action and confess his feelings. Earlier in the show, Mob would have just quietly accepted defeat, but he has grown, something that's evident as he prepares for his confession. Mob talks openly about his feelings and isn't afraid to ask for help. He has a support group that hypes him up and gives him advice. He even builds up the confidence to call Tsubome and ask her to meet one-on-one. Mob goes and buys flowers, picks out a nice outfit, and is on his way to meet her. Oh hey Truck-kun, what are you doing here? Wait. Mob throws away everything by sacrificing himself to save a young boy from becoming roadkill. He could have used his powers to save the boy, but instead, he lies motionless on the ground, blood gushing from his head. Luckily, this isn't the end of things, but unluckily, Mob's consciousness gets taken over by the incarnation of his powers, which I like to call Inner Shige. While before, Mob's conscious mind was able to control Inner Shige, now it goes berserk. Inner Shige rampages through the city, enraged that Mob's hesitance to use his powers kept him from his true desires. Mob's greatest enemy always was himself. But things aren't the same as they once were. Throughout the show, Mob lent his strength to so many people, and now, in his greatest time of need, those people finally come back to repay the favor. And in the process of trying to stop Inner Shige, their character arcs all come to a completion. Teru selflessly saves everyone, showing that he doesn't think of himself as above others. Ritsu stops being scared of his brother and expresses his true feelings, and Toichiro chooses to stop fighting so that he can be with his family. Still, none of them are able to stop Mob. He's too far gone, his two selves contending within the recesses of his mind. If only Mob could get rid of the other, ugly side of himself, but he can't. And slowly, the Mob we knew begins to fade from existence, replaced by the very entity he spent the whole series repressing. There's only one hope left for Mob, his master, Reigen. With the help of Serizawa, Reigen is able to get within earshot of Mob, but his words have no effect. Inner Shige tells Mob that Reigen is a liar, that he was only using Mob for his powers, and that once Reigen sees Shigeo's other side, he'll give up on him. But that's not the Reigen we know and love. Our Reigen would never give up on Mob, and without cover, runs fearlessly onward. With a little help from Dimple, Reigen is able to reach Mob and finally tells him the full truth. He doesn't have any powers. Reigen is a liar, to Mob, to his customers, to everyone. He lied about his strength because he didn't want others to find out that deep down, he's weak. A scared, lost soul that isn't special in any way. But you know, maybe that's okay. At the end of the day, his weakness is what makes him who he is. And the same goes for Mob. Both sides of Mob called the other fake for so long, but in reality, Shigeo Kageyama was a mix of both. Because your strengths, your weaknesses, the parts you love, the parts you hate, they're all what make you, you. And that's what Reigen means when he tells Mob that he's fine, just the way he is. Ultimately, Mob Psycho 100 is a story about acceptance, about how in order to truly change, we first have to accept where we are. And at the end of the story, that's what Mob does. He decides to accept all sides of himself, finally completing the permanent change he spent the whole series striving for. His rampage ends, and Mob confidently completes his goal of confessing his feelings to Tsubome. She sadly doesn't feel the same way about him, but you know what? He's okay. Instead of destroying another city block, he now only sheds a few tears before moving on. Mob achieves a level of self-mastery that makes him almost unrecognizable when compared to the emotionless kid we meet at the beginning of the series. It's a change that inspires almost everyone he meets, and one that also inspires me. And to be honest, I usually don't vibe with complete character 180s all that much. Sometimes I just can't get myself to believe that a character would change that quickly or fully based on the events of a story. But something about Mob's transformation just feels so earned. We watched him keep at it, trying and failing for so long, that when he finally achieves his goals, it feels real. Like I could do it too. There's a quote that I love by One where he talks about writing this story. He says, "What I have in mind is to tell a big story of one little step." I don't believe our lives change completely for the better at a short notice. It's all the small progress we make that's important. The characters in Mob Psycho don't just change immediately. While their growth may have been set off by some major event, it's all the small acts of kindness and inner strength that over time come to define who they are. And I love that about this show. I know this whole video has been extremely pretentious, but I just can't help but gush about this story. Like I said before, Mob Psycho 100 has genuinely changed the way I view the world. It's a story that sets itself apart from others by saying, hey, maybe life isn't so bad. There is good in the world, and that good is worth chasing after. Human interaction is necessary and meaningful, and people can change through their interactions with others. And if no one is special, then with enough persistence, maybe you can be the person you want to be. So I guess all that's left for me to say is thank you 1 and thank you Mob Psycho 100 for everything. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. I wanted to let you guys know that this is going to be my last video for at least 2 years. In a couple of weeks, I'll be moving to El Salvador to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It'll be awesome, and I'm super excited, but I also won't have access to any of my video making gear. That's why I would never normally ask this, but if you like my stuff, then please turn on notifications for my channel. I promise I'll get back to making videos in the future, and when I do, they'll be better than ever. Again, thank y'all so much for your support and kind comments. I'll see y'all later.